Okay, let's just get on the internet, and here we go. Oh, okay, cool.
AI is teaching the machine and the machine becoming smart.
Very unusual paintings for their time.
What is real?
We'll not be able to hold a candle to AI.
Human and machine cooperate.
This is a bunch of flowers stuck in a vase.
How do you define real?
Okay, well, it turns out the internet has a few things on it. If it's not The Matrix or Elon Musk and his Twitter feed, it's Google Ads and the metaverse, algorithms and TikTok face filters. Some form of artificial intelligence has been a part of our lives the last couple of decades. Now, we aren't quite to the level where AI ruins everything and turns us into batteries. Predictions really vary on that timeline. But AI as a tool, that's very real. At least for now, humans are the key factor. We create the software and the hardware to generate artificial intelligence, and that lives within a program. The AI then learns, and it creates based on what it's learned, and continues to learn. Now, listen, I'm not here to debate the pros and cons of AI. That is for a far more savvy podcast host to tackle. But what are the real possibilities? AI computers have learned how to repaint old masterworks with incredible detail, even running through tons of sequences to create original work. They learn based on data sets fed into their systems, and they create from seeing thousands or even millions of images. With that, they're sort of retooling what was once human instinct. That's where today's featured artist comes in. Tiffany Calvert, a professor at the University of Louisville and a multidisciplinary artist. I'll let her explain her work, but the 30,000-foot view, it's a mix of her brain, old Dutch masters, tulip mania in the Netherlands more than 300 years ago, as well as a partner in the AI software and the choices that it makes, living, of course, within the parameters Tiffany decides on. And it learns, and it creates a version of what it thinks is correct. The work is fantastic. It has a richness and a texture that pulls you right into the Matrix. On this, Episode 4 of Artist Proof. Tiffany Calvert, this is not a simulation.
So my name is Tiffany Calvert. We're here in the studio building for the MFA program at the University of Louisville, where I'm associate professor and also graduate director at the moment, which is really enjoyable, here in Louisville, Kentucky. I've lived here about 5 years, entering my 6th year. I've moved around a lot. I've lived on both coasts and being an active exhibiting artist since, graduate school in 2005. So it's been a while now. I think a lot of artists have a sort of narrative that they've built around their formation. And it's really been building over time. So yeah, I've been an exhibiting artist since before graduate school, but 15 years plus. And so that makes me mid-career now, right? And I'm turning 45 this summer. So I'm having like a little bit of a reflective moment. And also looking forward to a sabbatical that I'm applying for and like what I really want to do with that time. Feeling this feeling of like, wow, I've really settled into this moment as an artist where I'm very happy with the work and I'm very motivated to make a lot of it, which is very different than how I felt years ago.
If we were to ask a group of artists and critics the question, what does art want? We'd get dozens of different answers. But for this podcast, one of the key things that we're looking for is that answer to why. And maybe that in turn answers what art wants. Maybe art has a need to be explained. It requires it. When we sat down with Tiffany, it felt like we were in a masterclass on theory of teaching, how she operates in her own studio, her classroom, and how she inspires her students, asking that pivotal and important question of why, even if she can't always answer it herself. Now, that question becomes even more complex with the introduction of artificial intelligence. Why did you as an artist make a stylistic choice is very different than with AI, where the why, well, you have to ask, does it even exist?
it's such an unfair thing to say to students. And I say this to them, and I'm like, I'm going to ask you a lot of why. What are the decisions for? Because you need to practice all of these visual decisions. You need to practice articulating. But I also try to be open about the fact that I don't want to mislead them. Like, a lot of the pursuit in my paintings is I don't know why I do the next thing. That's why it's so interesting to me. In order to be obsessed with it, there has to be some not knowing. And it's a little unfair to tell them, and maybe unwise. Maybe they're too young to hear it. Maybe I shouldn't say it. But I went through a really awful, so I've talked about this in artist lectures before, and friends have found it surprising I would admit this, but when we lived in Brooklyn, I went through a terrible period of not being able to make art, and other artists were super helpful to me at that time. So I was talking to an artist at a party at a friend's house, and I said, I don't understand what's wrong with me. I think I have to see a doctor. Every time I go in my studio to work, I just lay down on the floor on a piece of cardboard and go to sleep. And she just nodded her head and smiled, and she was like, you hate your work. I mean, like she knew right away. She's like, you hate your work. And it was so, so true. I hated the work I was making. It was so oppressive to me. The second I stepped in my studio, I could not surmount. I couldn't even pick up the brush. It just, now that I know what that feeling is, it's very helpful to know that. But I did not know at the time. I really was very disconnected from understanding why that was happening. I mean, I was also tired. I had 3 jobs and I commuted. It did help. It did contribute. And so I actually did, New York Foundation for the Arts, NYFA, does a really helpful thing. And I think they still only do it to local New York artists, but they may do it virtually too. It's called Doctor's Hours. And you could go in for like speed crit sessions. You pay like $50 and you get like a speed crit and I think it was Judith Simonian did one with me, and I'm forever grateful because she just looked at me and was like, I was saying like, oh, I'm making these 300-hour Rococo interiors and then I wreck them. She just looked at me like, why are you making it? She said, why are you making it harder? Painting is hard enough. Just make paintings. Like, you're deliberately making it harder for yourself as like in a way to justify it, right? If it's hard, then it must be good. And it was such a clear, I mean, in 15 minutes, it was such a clear perspective on what I was doing. And it was one of just a few comments I got in that 1.5 year period from other artists that got me through. Another from an artist friend, Christian, said to me, Tiffany, but you can't go from these paintings around to these paintings you want over here. You can only go through. And that also was just like, I think that these sound like very simple pieces of advice, but I think it's the moment that you hear it that it's like the most useful. Just like I can't let go of trying to pursue digital media, I can't let go of trying to pursue painting. And if I don't paint for 5-6 days, I get very unpleasant. Like, it's just like, it's a place where, and this is where artists get to sound a little bit religious about their practice, right? But it's a meditative space and a place where there's a combination of control and lack of control that I can't imagine giving up at any point. There's just something really magical about that. There's a beautiful quote by Milton Resnick that I always hang on my studio wall, which says, painting is a wave that wrecks my will. I wait upon it as servant rather than master. And just, I mean, it's a beautiful, it captures the sort of romantic end of, I mean, I think when I explain my work, a lot of people hear a lot of technical information. And what I can sometimes forget to talk about, because it's harder to articulate, is that space of painting that is, and I can't believe I'm using these words, but like fulfilling in some way, or that meditative space that you need when the rest of the world is totally insane, that sometimes it is a contentious fight that can feel uncomfortable. And sometimes, as they say, the studio wins, like you just leave defeated. Right. But there's a beauty in the total magic of what happens with paint on surface that any painter is gonna tell you about, and then also have a very hard time describing.
And down the rabbit hole we go. But before we dive into Tiffany's work and process, I have one major encouragement. Now, don't stop the episode, of course, because I need the algorithm to look friendly for this podcast. But after you're done in traffic or whatever it is you do while listening, go check out the images of Tiffany's work. We have them up on our social media pages, Patreon, or you can check out Tiffany's website. Listening to her explain her work is captivating, and she's extremely thorough. But seeing the physical work brings it all together. Like abstract paintings, it's a rabbit hole that sucks you in. The intensity it forces your eyes to contend with is somewhere between those old magic eye images we had as kids and standing in front of abstractions from Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock, the color fields of a Rothko. Then somehow they still reflect those 17th century paintings that pull from maybe Boschart or Baird. Each area of the canvas you focus on finds a new shape, a new figure, depth. All right, here we go. We can all hold hands.
So with both painting and digital media, I can't help myself. If there's something that I don't know yet, I want to learn it. And the learning part, so there's kind of a constantly moving thing. The learning part is really exciting to me. Mm-hmm. But I also don't stay in one place a super long time. The constants, though, are new technologies and also the history of abstract painting itself. And they just keep coming up as things that are unending. Mm-hmm. There's a sort of wrestling with paint that is endless. And the further you get from direct intention, the closer you get to real painting. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
And then digital media is constantly changing. And not only that, the access that you can have to incredible digital media now on your home laptop is like the fact that I can do such a powerful AI on my home laptop, which is 5 years old, is just an opportunity I kind of can't. I can't wait. So I could not wait to plug in a bunch of images and see what the AI spit out.
Sure.
I'm just curious. So the source images in a lot of my work are the Dutch and Flemish still life paintings of 17th century. So much of the ones I use are the flower paintings specifically. And that's because initially, there's so much in them. Mm-hmm. Initially, I was attracted to the flower paintings because a sort of constant pursuit of mine or interest is representational abstraction. So looking at something that is purportedly totally representational, but that is actually very abstract once it's flattened into two dimensions. So these botanical paintings, these flower paintings, were crazy and bizarre to me in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. One is that the original paintings are at such a high level of resolution. You have like every little vein in a fly's wing and like droplet on a peach, right? So it's at a level of resolution it's not at all like photography, because photography would have depth of field. This is like HDR almost, but like every level of the painting is at the same level of intensity, which to me is like an all over painting, like a Jackson Pollock. Yeah. Like if the flowers completely fill the field and there is no place where there's like not an intense amount of detail, there's an element of abstraction there to me. And so that was really the initial interest, but it turns out that there's so much more once you start digging. There's a great book by Bryson called Looking at the Overlooked. That's such an amazing, like deep analysis of historical still life paintings and what they were doing and what they mean, but also this idea of an all over field, or he talks about them as diagrammatic. So they were examples of botanical. So like those flower paintings, they'd have like one of each type of flower, probably most of which would not have bloomed at exactly the same moment. Sure. So it's total fiction. And also it's not really a bouquet in the round. They're very flattened out so that you can see each specimen. So Bryson calls them diagrammatic, which again is like this modernist paradigm of the grid, right? Like it's all there. And then the additional layers are that the paintings themselves, there's that, so tulipomania is that moment in the Dutch economy where very famously a tulip bulb could cost more than a house. It turns out that may be a tiny bit apocryphal, but nonetheless, It was still an economic bubble. It was still a moment when the pursuit of this thing of beauty just overtook an economy, which is amazing, right? Economics is amazing just in the sense that it's basically based on emotions and psychology, not facts, right? Which is so. So these paintings were fictions. They were commodities in the same way, and so I think a lot about the commodity of the digital image now, and now the NFT, right? So now this value is being hung on this basically ephemeral object and ephemeral currency in a way that I just see so much similarity to the tulips. And then to get even, I mean, it never stops. So to get even deeper, the most prized tulip of that tulip era was a sort of cream tulip with a scarlet stripe called the Semper Augustus. It had a name. And that striping was caused, they did not know this at the time, was caused by tulip breaking virus, or TBV. It would be damaging to the furthering of the propagation of that tulip is because it was a virus that had infected it. Well, again, there's viruses that can infect images now, right? So there's this beautiful parallel, which I do sometimes. So there are some moments in the images, such as this one on the left, where some of the striping and chromatic aberration is caused by me inserting code into the original image code to create that disruption in the image. So 2 years ago, I started infecting or glitching some of my source images with the DNA markers of TBV, or tulip breaking virus. So when I went to start researching this, I was like, what did cause this infection, right? Like, what is this virus and how can I stick it in? Not knowing I was going to find that somebody had actually mapped the genetic markers. Right. Well, it turns out that it's still a problem in tulip fields. And I found a research paper from about, I think, 10 or 12 years ago on like, a journal site, that tulip growers were using cameras trained with AI data sets in tulip fields to sort of drive through the fields with a camera looking down at the tulip plants, looking for aberrations. And when it finds an aberration in the plant, it knows that's an indicator of TBV, and it removes those bulbs because that will infect the crop and destroy a bunch of tulips. So tulip growers are also using AI and are mapping the genes of this TBV. So first I inserted the genetic code into the images in order to sort of glitch it and cause striping, like literally the same thing that happens in the tulip itself, right? But then I got really interested in like, okay, if they're using AI, then I want to also. Sure. So, and it was like, I can't believe how sort of simultaneously and just fluidly this all just came together. So I now create, so just in the past year and a half, I now create all my images using artificial intelligence software. Okay. So I take a data set that I gathered of historical still life paintings from all over. So some of them are just from Google image searches. Some of them are from museum websites. It's always very interesting to see what you get. They are all like truly historical still life paintings. You get a lot of garbage too when you do those Google searches of people copying them. And then trained a StyleGAN. So a StyleGAN is generative adversarial network, which just means, and again, somebody's going to take issue with how I explain it, but that's okay. I'm an artist, right? This is how I would explain it. Generative adversarial network, it sort of means that the artificial intelligence is looking for same and different, right? Adversarial. And so, and you can train it in a number of steps. So you can say, okay, I want you to do 500 steps and it's going to take 2 hours. And that'll get you like something close, but a little wacky. Sure. And then so the bigger the data set and the longer you train the AI and then the longer you let it process, the more accurate it gets. My first data set was only 1,000 images. That's a relatively tiny data set. Most data sets are 5,000 or upwards of 1 million. And also I didn't train it I trained it for a couple hours. I let it go for a couple hours. But the result is that the images are really bizarre, right? And so I don't actually, at least for now, I wasn't interested in it getting that much more accurate. I wanted to see, and a lot of the weirdness that you see in the images is because the AI is seeing a floral shape and then also like a cut open peach, and trying to stick them together because there are a lot of similarities in those two like image characteristics. And so you get these, I mean, they look like jellyfish, they look like organs or cells, they look like vaginas, they have all these like sort of morphology similarities that are amazing, but not very much like flowers. Can it learn reliably if it doesn't have enough information, or if a human isn't making sure that data set is actually useful to the computer? Sure. If I have a 5,000 or a 10,000 or a 15,000 image data set, and there's also a question of how many historical paintings exist, right?
Sure.
But if, let's say I have the maximum number, it's possible I can train this thing to get awfully close. So there will be this verisimilitude, this like uncanniness where it looks, and that may be interesting too, that it looks for all the world like a Dutch painting almost, but there's something just like not, like these right now, are wrong. But I think, a pursuit in the next 2 years to get it close enough to make people feel really sort of uncomfortable is an interesting. What characteristics are held over that the computer understood to be consistent, that make it recognizable to you, its original source, even though they look wrong? Sure. So for sure, there's a dramatic light and shadow that you just recognize as Dutch, right? Yeah. And for sure, there's a composition, especially to these floral ones, that's either pyramidal or oval, oval shaped with a sort of flattened bottom where the vase is. You just sort of register as those paintings' composition. Other ones, so recently I started adding in quite a few have like dead birds or fowl in them, right? Mm-hmm. So in this middle one that I just made 2 weeks ago, this white weird thing and these blue things, it's actually like leaves and plants getting mixed with the feathers of the birds. So like down here, that very much looks like the wing of a fowl, like a chicken or a duck or something, but at the same time, this must be plant because it looks like stems. Yeah. And so there's a lot of like what things the computer sort of wrongly assimilates together is, yeah. And by the way, when I ask it to make a data set, it makes 50 at a time. Okay. So these are just a few of the enormous data sets that I now have hundreds of images I could pick from, and I could have more today. Like I go home today and do another 2 hours and get a completely different set. Yeah. So it's pretty endless.
We've bridged a huge gap from the 17th century to the use of computers, and not only software, but artificial intelligence programs that essentially make decisions for Tiffany. Again, based on her direction. Sort of. So, who is the artist? When cameras were invented just before the middle of the 19th century, it took decades before photographers were widely accepted as artists. The thinking at the time was the camera did all the work. That, of course, was very inaccurate. But what about in this scenario? What about with AI?
The rapidity with which artificial intelligence is advancing is breathtaking and much faster than I think it's always an accelerating thing, digital media, but much faster than what you and I experienced with like Photoshop 1 in 1997. Yeah. It's that sort of crawled along, it felt like, for a while because there was a lot of infrastructure to be built in that software. Yeah. Now we have like such a rapid and exponential growth of these abilities that it is stunning. So by the time I make another set of paintings, they're going to keep updating my StyleGAN and give me something else. The fact that I might sort of engage back and forth with this robot and say like, okay, chew this up and spit it out. I'm thinking of like Nam June Paik and Wim Delvoye's Cloaca, like things where I'm like, here's the food. Now you chew it up and spit it out, and then I'm going to have my way with it too. So it's like this back and forth where we are, equals. So to me, that dilemma of the conversation between the two, it gets at those AI ethical questions. It gets at the questions of what happens when I sort of make us equals. In a lot of ways, these paintings are 50% paint, and they're 50% me and 50% the computer. They're literally 50% covered in my paint, and the other 50% is the image. So I've really put the computer and myself on par, right, with each other. the machine in that sense becomes both the control and the variable. On the one hand, I don't get to choose what it does with the information I fed it, but I did give it I gave it a prescribed set of images, and then after that, I don't have control over what comes out of it. That's it. The other place that occurs is in the actual making of the painting. So all of these paintings are made first by printing the digital image source really large on canvas, and that is stretched. And then before I paint, though, I design a full-scale mask in Illustrator, and I have that printed on adhesive vinyl. So I started out making the masks by hand, but it's much easier to design a large-scale painting by making the mask in Illustrator. And I have a great guy here in town who makes the vinyl masks for me, and he let me experiment with all different. I mean, I think this is a novel process. I don't know any artists using this exact process, but he let me experiment with the different materials that would both stick to the canvas well enough to mask off the oil paint so it wouldn't slide underneath, but then also peel off when you're done. So what's interesting is I cover most of the painting with this vinyl mask, and it's white. Like, I can't see the hidden areas. So I can sort of start painting knowing the information inside the unmasked area. But then once there's a bunch of paint, I now have obliterated. I can't see any of the image anymore. It's either covered with paint or covered with mask. So there's like a leap of faith that I have to do where I go, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm doing. Like, I'm going to let my like painter brain take over and then peel it. And for some reason it keeps working, but there is a huge lack of control there because I can't see what I'm doing. And I love that. That's addictive. It's like Christmas every time you pull the vinyl mask off.
There's an interesting like correlation between, you're talking about giving the AI certain parameters in the data set. And then at the same time, you give yourself, I think I read and presume that these have to be done within a day, right?
Yes.
So once that mask goes on and you start painting, you have a finite amount of time that you've got to get this thing finished. So you're sort of giving yourself these parameters to operate within as well.
It's great. So the reason that occurs is that, and you think you make these decisions one at a time, but I probably made these decisions because that's how I work best. Like you just sort of lead yourself sometimes. The reason it's a necessity is if I start to paint with oil with the mask on, and that if I were to leave overnight and the oil paint were to start to dry or create a skin, then when I pulled the vinyl mask off, it would pull the paint with it, or at least the skin, and make a mess. Yeah. So on the big ones, I can apply the mask the night before, and I can mix a bunch of colors and put them in tubes ahead of time. So I can have like the colors relatively ready to go. But the painting itself is a finite moment. And it catches some paint and leaves holes in other areas. Similar thing here. And what I'm trying to achieve is that it looks almost exactly like the image source, but in a totally different way. So that way, when you look at, and here's where I'm going to reveal my romanticism again. When you look at a John Singer Sargent painting and oh my God, if you look at a John Singer Sargent painting, then you want to quit painting because you obviously suck. But the lace on a dress or the fold in taffeta or a hand, it looks exactly like a fold in taffeta from 15 feet away. But up close, it's nothing. Like, it disintegrates, right? It's just paint. I want the exact same thing. So in some ways, I'm influenced by realism, actually, like with a capital R. But I want the same thing to happen, and that is when you're standing back from the painting, the paint looks photographic because something about the brushstroke or the drag replicated that texture of the photo underneath. But then when you get close, it disintegrates into paint. And then when I'm done with that, and by the time I filled in all the mask holes with paint, I can't see the image underneath anymore. Like I'm now painting from memory. So at a certain point, it's gotten so far along, I know I can't remember anymore, and I have to take a deep breath and peel it and hope that, and I can't really change it after that. Sure. Because I'd have to remask. Not that I never do, but I'd have to remask that section. Yeah. So generally speaking, I don't. I kind of accept it the way it comes out.
Are they ever finished to you, or?
Yeah. So was it Turner that they said used to go into the museum and adjust his paintings? Yeah. So it's a funny position I put myself in, right? on the one hand, no, because there's no way I can look at a painting and be told, like, I'm going to want to tweak something. I mean, there's no painter who doesn't do that. But I put myself in the position where it's actually very difficult to change these paintings and have them feel whole again, because they are made all at once, which is the sort of magic of what you think about de Kooning paintings too, right? Which is probably not how they happen, but they look like they magically all happened in 1 hour, right? There's what they say, 80% ass scratching. Yeah. But for it to be magically whole, if I then go try to tweak one section of this masked off area, it disconnects it from the gestures of the others. So I am kind of, it is like a $500 leap of faith. Yeah. But I can't really imagine now that painting can be anything else. It has to be that you're never satisfied. That's why you chase it. That's why Milton Resnick talks about it like a wave, right? Like, you have to chase it. If you were so certain it's done, then that's design. Oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble for saying that. But you know what I mean? Like, if you knew what it was going to be and then you execute it and it's done, it's somehow whole in a way that a painting should never be whole.
This idea of chasing art, the thrill of pursuing something that sometimes feels fruitless or pointless. Why do we create? And honestly, what's the point? Listen, I'm not trying to be a full-fledged nihilist here, but I have asked myself that question a lot over the years. Is this even worth it? And what does it do for any of us? Not just me. But it's conversations like this with people like Tiffany that put it back into perspective and give it some clarity. That highlights this idea that other than having thumbs, our ability as humans to create something from nothing is what separates us from everything else. And what we do with that skill, what we do with that opportunity in our cultures and our societies, determines our path.
Yeah, which is very hard to do. And I feel myself trying to find ways to justify it. Even though I've said I've let go of so much of that. But it is hard. I had a friend recently talk about artistic knowledge in a way that was sort of admiring. And I said, it's funny because I sort of don't give myself or a lot of other artists sort of credit for that, what we might call knowledge production or expertise, or I think a lot of artists struggle with this feeling, especially this past year, with it feeling indulgent or selfish or unimportant or not a way to change the world. You know, it's many artists feel that way. Listen, it's a historical truth. It's also a beautiful sentiment. I wish I could internalize it more, but I do have a lot of insecurity about like what good it is that I'm doing. You know, it's hard. Yeah, but keep saying it because I love hearing artists put it in different ways why it's important. I think it's not a given. I like to hear someone tell me why. It's very interesting to me. For me, the historical truth of it is the most convincing. Sure. The fact that art is always made. No matter what the sort of difficult conditions the artists are living in, the art is always made, right? Sure. Yeah, there is some freedom in chasing something that, again, not to get too sort of like out there weird about, but like, chasing something I don't know there would be no other mystery in my life besides my child's growth and development, which is mysterious and bizarre and crazy and weird and shocks me every day. Right. Besides that, there would be no other mystery in my life. Yeah, I have no choice. Yeah, that makes it easier.
What do you do if you can't do this?
And given that the drive there is so different from every other drive, and being able to feel that, not being in that place where you're sort of stuck and hate your work, but feeling like, wow, I can't wait to make more of this. You sort of have to know that's like I said, the gift of any critics and curators around you is if they tell you what you're doing, it's so helpful. How could you see it all for yourself?
One of the most important things as I look back on my art education was being surrounded by my peers and having sometimes intense critiquing sessions. But we were all in it together, thinking critically, making choices both artistically and philosophically, building and tearing down to get to this far-off answer as to why. Why were we doing this? Being an artist isn't about hanging something on a wall or placing it in a gallery. Those things may come with time, but the point, if there is one, is expression. Expression of the self, expression of the mind, having feelings and ideas, rubbing two brain cells together and making a thought. While they might not always feel cohesive, but grabbing onto them, putting them down on canvas, paper, a screen, that's how we sustain. That's how we sustain as artists. Like the AI, we continue to pursue and learn to seek out the next thing, to further ourselves.
So, I think there's two major components that I are myself as an artist. One is I think that I can see over time this long-term engagement with a sort of graspable representation, and then the coexistence of not being able to grasp what you're seeing, that even though my image subject matter has changed greatly, that sort of wrongness and rightness, that's in all my paintings. And that's a legacy of the modernist project of painting. To make a painting that is inscrutable, that's just all I want to do. That's why I can chase it forever. The specifics that right now I can delve really deeply into in terms of DNA and AI and TBV and tulipomania, that's great. But the lasting part, that pursuit of painting, that's what's going to, when the body of work morphs again, that will be the thing that I think I now see with distance is consistent. And that takes a long time. And the other thing I would say is it does, I got this advice from an older friend a long time ago. It does feel kind of great to be an artist in their mid-career, because as I think I mentioned earlier in the interview, there are a lot of insecurities that I've decided to let go of. I'm not saying I don't feel insecurities, is my work relevant right now? I ask myself that question all the time. Is anyone going to want to care about it? There's a lot of figurative painting in New York City right now, and this is not figurative, right? So you still worry. But I sort of, the mantra that's become useful in my head, I now just say to myself, it doesn't matter. Because if you don't make the work that you desperately want to make, then you'll fall asleep on your studio floor on a piece of cardboard. So I kind of, in a way, I don't have control over that. I make these paintings because these are the ones that come, and that's it. And to that freedom to be that's what it is. I have to make these, period. And to let go of, how should I be as a woman artist? Will my work matter to, the larger art conversation? Of course, I ask myself those things all the time, but I also have to let that go. And I have to make the next thing not knowing what it is. And I can't wait to get in my studio every day. That is not, I don't want to give the impression that I felt that way always. Like you said, you didn't either, right? There have been long, years where I couldn't find that yet. And I think that's learned. I think that's learned through age, experience, dogged pursuit, following fascination, but it's not something that's a given.
It's a hell of an ending.
Oh, okay, good.
That's great.
Thanks to Tiffany Calvert for letting us take over her studio for a couple of hours. You can check out more of her work on our social pages at ArtistProofOfficial on both Instagram and Twitter, or check out her website, tiffanycalvert.com. And if you really want to dig deep, visit our Patreon for more exclusives and short-form snippets from each episode. Artist Proof is produced by myself, Justin Key, for Wilder Media, with additional production coordination by Riley Walker. The show is available on Spotify and Apple Music or wherever else you get your podcasts. So tell your friends, tweet us, tweet at us, tweet with us. Everybody just tweet. Use the internet to help us get more listeners, because more listeners means more episodes, means your happiness increases, and it's all science. Next time, we chat with visual artist Joshua Edward Bennett, where we discuss everything from paintings to iconography.
It's a method that is not new.
Right.
60s psychedelic posters use these same color combinations. Super vibrant colors that are literally fighting for your attention, and they become this moment of close your eyes and refocus because you're not sure what to look at. That's exactly what I want out of these. Be autonomous and have a power within them, just visually, not alone let alone their like iconography, or their iconic context, what they might mean. I want them to sort of have a vibration of their own.
That's next time on Artist Proof.